Hello, my name is Randy Harrington, and I am going to talk to you about a report that is close to my location. And it's very interesting. I don't think there is any other report that I've come across that involves the same circumstances as this. Uh, as you can see in the title, Lansing Kansas Sod Layer Bigfoot Incident. So let's get on to the locations. All right, here's an overview of the area that I live in. And as you would expect, ever since my encounter back in 2006, I have talked about Bigfoot. People have reached out to me. People have reached out to me about other people who have seen something. And so I've come in contact with plenty of people, even people around, where I live. So that's what this incident is about. So on this map, I drew the number 1 at the top, where you can see that's the video that I just dropped a week or so ago about Weston Bend State Park and Fort Leavenworth, and the BFRO reports of footprints found, the conversation that I had with the park ranger, and the footprints that she had pictures of, and that was all just north of where I live, and that was in Fort Leavenworth and across the river on the Missouri side. So come further down, you got Leavenworth. Well, you got Fort Leavenworth, then you got Leavenworth south of that, and then you've got Lansing south of that. So the incident that I'm going to talk to you about is where I've written the number 2 and drew that circle. There's a subdivision in there that had something happen, and that's the story that I'm going to get into. But I also want to show you there's other stuff going on within that proximity. Now you can see the river valley over to the east there, where you've got the Missouri River and the flatlands between the bluffs. So it's not far from that area. So the number 3 that I have over here is out at the county shop in Leavenworth County. There was a sighting there. And then the number 4 down here just south of the location that I'm going to be talking about, there was a police officer who saw one cross the highway there. And so I've had discussions with both of these other incidents, and of course they look like they're all connected. So let's go into the next picture. All right, so this is a much closer view at the south end of Lansing. And the little circle that I drew up at the top of this map is the location of the nursery. There was a nursery, and the owner of the nursery, well, a nursery, they have trees and flowers and grass and landscaping stones and statues, and it was on the corner of this road on the highway there, where there was this huge nursery. And so they did do all kinds of landscaping jobs around town and out in the county. So the number 2 area, which is the one I'm going to be talking about, you can see that in this subdivision, it's got a big, huge wooded area back in behind it, with wooded fingerlings going off in different directions, following a creek or low-lying areas amongst farm fields and things like that. And some of them all go all the way to the highway. Like that would certainly be a nice travel route of something that needed to cross the highway. So that kind of gives you an overview, at least where this subdivision is. And the subdivision was based on the Robin Hood fairy tale. So all of the roads were named things like Robin Hood Lane, and I think the subdivision was called Sherwood Forest. So I mean, I have done some sighting work out there. So let's go on to the next picture. All right, now this is where the nursery was located. Now this was like 16, 17 years ago when this all happened, and since then the nursery closed down and sold to the county, and now it is the Humane Society. So they've taken out all of the facilities there and put kennels inside them, and they house all of these stray dogs and things like that, for the adoption process of these animals. But originally, this was the location of the nursery, and I was told by my brother-in-law at the time. Now, granted, this was just a couple of years after my encounter in 2006. So, I was talking to everybody about this subject, and my brother-in-law, he said, "Man," he said, "you need to go down and talk to so and so." I can't remember his name, but he says you need to go down, the Lansing Nursery right there at uh, whatever that street is. Oh, Gilman. Yeah, Gilman. And he says, you just need to talk to the owner. He said, I'll call him and tell him you're going to come down there. So that's how this was set up. And I did go down there. So within that facility, he had an office, and I went in there and we sat at his office desk. I was on one side, he was certainly behind the other, and he unfolded this story for me. But before we get into it, I got to show you a couple more things. Number two, the circle with the number two, that's where this incident happened. Just across the way is that number three incident that I was telling you about. Now, in that incident, a person was coming back from Lawrence, Kansas, and those are all country roads, rural roads, uh, lots of farmland, and then lots of fingerling wood areas, patches of wood, low-lying areas that do not have crops in them because how farmland is. But you can see uh, that little arrow that I drew by that number three. There was a roadside crossing that this person saw around 2 or 3 a.m. when they were coming back from Lawrence to Leavenworth. And there's a stop sign there at that corner where I drew that corner arrow. There's a stop sign there where they have to come to a stop as you're heading north, and then they turned right on Tonganoxie Road there. And there's a series of 5 or 6 houses, houses on 5-acre lots. So the houses are spaced pretty good apart. So the second or third house, as she was just taking off, so she hadn't even hit the full 45 or 50 miles an hour, because she had just turned. Something ran between two of the houses across the road and headed south. And she, at the time I talked to her, she said that it was a big open field, but she could see that there were trees at the bottom of the field. So I went out there and looked at it, and indeed, she said there was no fence. It just ran straight into this field or through this field. And so I went out there and looking in that direction. Indeed, it's a cultivated farming field, and at the bottom of that area is a bunch of trees. So you can see those trees down there, the fingerlings of trees, branching out into the fields that are cultivated. And that's where she said it was heading. So you can see how close it is to the incident that I'm going to describe to you. And you can see all of the woods, the pathways, the possible pathways, the water sources, in and out of subdivisions. It's very interesting, and we certainly know more about how these things travel, and they are clearly using these type of areas. So let's move into the next picture. All right, and now here's one more. The number two up there is the location of the incident I'm going to be explaining to you. The number four, just south on that highway, is a subdivision called Falcon Lakes. I had a discussion with a retired police officer who one early morning was heading back to the Lansing Leavenworth area on that highway and had one cross the road in front of his vehicle coming somewhere out of that subdivision area. So I don't know if it was north or south or where the subdivision was. I just drew the circle where the subdivision is. And there's a lake in there. That's why it's called Falcon Lake. So, and again, on the upper right-hand corner of this picture, I'm drawing an arrow to where the river is. So this is all in very close proximity to the river. And you can see all of the clusters of woods, big clusters, acres and acres of woods and water sources, plenty of travel areas. If let's just say their main source of travel is up and down along that river and then branching out as needed, to go into rural areas. That certainly makes sense. So now let's drop into the subdivision itself. So here's the subdivision, and I drew a circle around the general area of the things that took place uh, in what the business owner told me. And I'm going to go ahead and go to the next picture so you can see. I'm going to pick out two houses in particular. All right, so here we go. The business owner told me that they had a contract to lay sod in one of the houses back in there at the dead end, and he said that he had a crew and they'd spent a couple of days working, maybe even 3, but they'd laid a bunch of sod. And you know how sod is. It comes in these like 2-foot by 4-foot rolls, and they're rolled up. So basically they take them off pallets and unroll them and put them all together, and it's like covering up a yard with carpet, even though it's just fresh new grass. So, but it's in a form where it's just a movable pad, and then they just place them all together, and eventually the roots will go down and solidify it where it sets. But there's a moment when it's just a pad of grass sitting there. So they spent a couple of days getting all of this laid in place, put in place, and then they went about their business. I mean, they're a business that has other things to do, so they're doing their business. Well, he got a message, or he got a phone call a couple of days later, and the homeowner was like, "Well, when are you going to get out here and finish this?" And the the business owner was like, "Well, I mean, I've already sent the bill. What do you mean? When are we going to finish it?" And the homeowner says, "Well, you need to come out here and finish it." So the owner went out there, and he was kind of gobsmacked at what he saw. Something had scattered a lot of the grass uh, at the back of this house. Some of it, a lot of it was scattered and moved around, and some of it was even rolled up, because you know that this stuff, if it comes out rolled up, kind of like a folded piece of paper that you open back up, it has a tendency to want to fold back up on the line that it's already been folded on. I would think that as something was picking up and looking under this sod, that it saw that it would go into a naturally rolled position. So anyways, some of it was rolled up, and he said it was the damnedest thing. Uh, of course, I'm thinking rolled up sod, hands. I'm thinking hands. But he said, here's where it gets interesting. He said, I sent my crew back out there. He said, of course they were like, no, we finished the job. Well, we don't know what's going on, but they wanted to get paid. So he immediately got his guys back out there and straightening up and fixing, the areas where it was torn up. And he said next door was an old woman who came out and came over, saw the ruckus that was going on, and asked for the supervisor. And she kind of went off to the side with him, and she told him, she said, "Look, I see you guys are going through, some little bit of arguments over here about what's going on." She said, "And I'm going to tell you," she said, "I saw what happened." And guys like, "What?" They're thinking, of course, I'm sure the workers were thinking, "Oh, did some teenage kids come in here and tear it up thinking it was a funny thing?" And she was like, "Well," she said there were a couple of dark hair covered creatures that came out of the woods." And she said one of them was dragging the grass around and looking under it. And she said there were 3 of them. And she said one of them was holding a little one. And she said the one that was holding a little one actually came over and was on her deck. She had one of those low-lying decks that was only 1 step high to get up on. So it was basically just a back porch, a flat deck back porch outside of her back door. And she said, "I saw it up on my deck, and it had a little one, a baby." She said, "A baby in its arms." And I was like, you got to be kidding me. There is no way that you're telling me, to somebody like me who's super interested in it, that within 5 miles of where I live, this happened. But I start to try to think logically about it. The rolled up grass. And the fact that she said there was a little one, I could easily say, let's just say somebody watched a show on Bigfoot and so like, I'm gonna cause a joke. I'm gonna be like, yeah, there's a Bigfoot came out of the woods and messed up your grass, ha 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 ha. But she threw in details like there was three of them and one of them was a baby, and the female and the baby stayed back away from where the male was doing the grub search or whatever he was looking for, lizards, mice, who knows. Kind of reminds me of some reports I've read, out in the Pacific Northwest where a male was out in the surf pulling up kelp and throwing it up on the beach, and the female was up there waiting, and the two little ones were digging holes. So it's just, you start to see patterns. It seems less likely that this older lady would make up something that fits the patterns that we kind of know, but I don't know. I mean, she could be lying. I mean, but to have this business owner sit down at his desk and not be afraid to lay this story out to me, and he was just like, I don't know, man. And this was 16, 17 years ago. So, and the fact that I've had since then to accumulate 5 or 6 or 7 more incidents within this general area, each one adds credibility to the others in the location of where they happened. And when you start to look at the topography, and I've got to say, I'm inclined to believe this, and it is certainly interesting. So here's the last picture I want to show you, and this is a much further pulled out view on Google Map. You can see the Kansas City area down there at the bottom right corner. So where I've got that big circle with the number 2 in it, that's the Wyandotte County Lake Park. Very wooded, and it's on the river. There's been a couple of reports there. You can read them on BFRO, and I even think Sasquatch Chronicles has a story from that park, and I have a tendency to believe that they're possibly true. And I did talk to somebody who was at a campsite and was down on the riverside down through the woods and had a rock throwing incident. So yeah, I'm believing that it's possible there. So you got all these locations. 2, 3, and 4 is the ones that I just explained to you in close proximity to where I live. The number 1 up there, that's at the Fort Leavenworth. The BFR reports of footprints found on the Fort Leavenworth side. The conversation I had with the ranger on the Missouri side at the Weston Bend State Park. I've also talked to a witness up there in the Kickapoo Bottoms riding ATV who saw one. And then way up there at the top, I've got that town of DeKalb circled. I actually had a sit-down interview. I was working on a job site, and I had a Bigfoot shirt on it. This is 15 years ago. And I was working, and I had a Bigfoot t-shirt on, and a guy doing sheetrock, he looked at my shirt and he goes, "Are you one of those Bigfoot researcher guys?" And I said, "Well," I said, "I've had an encounter," and I said, "I enjoy talking about it. So I guess I'm a researcher." And he said, "Well, my grandmother says she saw one. It was back in the 70s." So he and I had this conversation about his grandmother, and I said, "Well, where did she have it?" He said, "Oh, just up here on the bluffs." And I said, "Where?" And he said, "DeKalb." And I didn't even know there was a town called DeKalb. I knew there was a Snow Creek and Rushville. I'd actually done a sighting job in Rushville, but I never heard of DeKalb. But Snow Creek is where everyone goes to do their sledding and skiing, in the winter months. So just north of Snow Creek is DeKalb, and it's up there on the bluffs, a little podunk town. And he gave me the contact information to his grandmother, who lived in a nursing home in St. Joseph, Missouri, further north. And I went and had a sit down chat with her about it, and it was nice. It was nice. So here's like this 90-year-old woman. She had all of her mental faculties. There was she had no confusion, and she had a very vivid memory of working in her garden and having a sighting there in DeKalb, and we discussed it, and it was very interesting to me. So you're accumulating all of these stories throughout our time of something happening along this river. And so now we fall back on this happening with the sod being laid in the back of this house right up against the woods into that wooded area. I give it a high probability of being true. Uh, and that's about all I can say about that. I sure hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Don't forget to subscribe and all that other bull.